From EU President Donald Tusk, haven't we? He's responded to Angela Merkel's calls for a leaders' summit.
Yeah, so she made that call yesterday, and that follows the meeting that we had at the Interior Minister level on Monday in Brussels, where they basically decided nothing. They agreed on the distribution of refugees, of 40,000 refugees, something that the EU had effectively kind of teed themselves up for before this summer, before this crisis even began. They failed to come up with a deal to distribute the remaining 120,000 that they've already pledged to take in. So I think she's decided that the idea of waiting for the same top cops, the same interior ministers, when they meet next month, October the 8th, is a bit pathetic, that this needs to go up the food chain, and it needs to happen now. So she called for the summit. It's Tusk's mandate decision to call it or not, and yesterday his spokesman said that he's going to make that decision Thursday, and now he's tweeting the same.
Angela Merkel in some ways has changed, moved on, altered her view. At the beginning of this story, she was very much the kind of, we're going to let people in, we're going to live up to the responsibility of being in the EU, we're going to become the migrants' friend. And that kind of chimed in certain instances with public opinion in Germany, not all. But that has now changed, and it's interesting to see the compare and contrast with other nations.
It is. You know, there's a couple things I think that are quite striking about how Angela Merkel has changed. If you think about it from a sort of EU perspective, she was sort of the tough guy when it came to Greece, wasn't she? And now she's sort of the conscience of Europe, or at least she was when Germany said we're going to let the refugees in. And now she has backtracked, but there's still a difference. If you compare her to, say, Viktor Orban, who I would argue has now become the bad guy in place of her because of his very tough stance on the refugees. You know, she's deploying, for example, the German Chancellor, 800 members of Germany's military to offices, to office duty, to process the migrants that they're going to let in, whereby he's deployed the military on Hungary's border with Serbia with machine guns. So there is a difference there. And meanwhile, you know, Viktor Orban and his government are building that fence that they were focusing on Hungary's border with Serbia, now on the Romanian border as well. At least they made that decision yesterday. But you're absolutely right. She's got her work cut out for her, because this is difficult. A lot of people within our own country and now within, you know, throughout the European Union are saying, how do you explain, how do you reconcile the fact that you said you're going to let these refugees in, and now, you know, Germany's closing its borders to some extent, and then within her own country, there's a lot of unease amongst the regional leaders who she met with yesterday, who are saying, exactly where is this going? What's the big plan?
And away from the humanitarian story, which of course is still at the forefront of this, the economic story is gaining momentum. You hear some voices suggesting that this could be a positive for various European countries that have low unemployment rates and are struggling with population growth. On the other hand, there are warnings.
And you have the, you know, the single biggest manifestation of that on the sort of financial front, and concerns for the EU on the financial front came yesterday from a report from S&P, which said the single biggest uncertainty when it comes to the individual sovereign ratings of EU countries involves Europe's ability to find a cooperative, as they put it, solution to this crisis. So Greece was a threat to the cohesion of Europe, and now that threat has been replaced by this one. In itself, it doesn't necessarily represent a fiscal or an important fiscal issue for these countries, but if they're unable to agree on this, then S&P says then that poses a governance issue, and that's an uncertainty when it comes to its ratings, because it does take into account issues of governance.
There was some talk at the start of this week that some European countries might be tempted to try and push back on some of their fiscal limits as a result of the demands put on them by the refugee crisis. I noticed that Wolfgang Schäuble quickly jumped on that one and didn't want that one to gain any momentum. Simon, let's bring you into the conversation. Is this something that, as an economist, this is popping up on your radar yet, either as a positive population growth story or as a negative? What does this do to the fiscal situation?
So Ryan's point about S&P and the governance point is very prescient from a management perspective. From a pure economic perspective, net migration is something that Europe desperately needs. Its working age population peaked in 2013. If we look at the precedent of Japan, whose working age population peaked in the early 90s, you don't want to take the next 2 decades of economic performance from Japan and transpose them into the European Union. So migrant inflows, and let's remember, in the short term, yes, there are fiscal requirements as short-term spending, housing requirements are there, but everything we know from the empirical data is these are upwardly mobile people who accrue skills at a very fast rate, and they become positive net contributors to the exchequer of the countries where they reside. So yes, the medium-term picture on migration is very much a pro for the European Union if it can attract migrants in these numbers.
What would accelerate the process? Is it language skills? Is it kind of what does the data tell us about how quickly we can get the net benefits of this? Like, I'm presuming language skills is going to be one of them. Getting them to work fairly quickly is another one of them. You're
absolutely right. Integration is key. If there are pre-existing migrant communities, then those systems they can easily assimilate into can enable them to find jobs, find places to live, and upskill, establish language skills. I think what you're looking for from European leaders is, as Ryan says, a strategy. You're actually looking for a strategy on how we're going to manage this this influx of labour to maximise economic potential.
And the calls for European solidarity coming from Germany and others where unemployment rates are very low clearly sound different when they are then falling on the ears of people where unemployment rates are much, much higher.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues that perhaps is raised by this question around governance and whether Europe is strong enough to withstand this kind of challenge with these unemployment rates that are so different.
Yeah, if you have high unemployment, you have principally a left-of-centre government or vocal opposition who can make a lump of labour fallacy argument resonate with the electorate, then yes, it's very, very difficult to garner public support for taking in migration. Clearly in Germany, to a lesser extent in the UK, you can make the case that actually this provides employers with a real boost. It provides the local communities with more consumers, more productive capacity. It really is quite a polarised debate right now.
When you look at Europe, I'll be curious to get both your take on this very quickly. Is Europe failing again?
I mean, I think, you know, all the actions we've seen thus far have been sort of kicking the can down the road. Or
I heard that somewhere before.
Yeah.
Greece. Oh, yeah, Greece, that was it.
or passing the buck. And in this case, it's quite physical and quite easy to see. So the refugees that have been piling up the border, at Serbia's border with Hungary, are now getting on buses and they're going to Croatia. So, because that's the next way in. So, you know, Viktor Orban may be solving Hungary's problems, or to a certain extent, perhaps solving Austria and Germany's problems, because they don't want to stay in Hungary in any case, do they? But he's creating problems for Croatia, maybe creating problems for Romania.
Yeah. Europe have not yet failed, but underlying the European Union, underlying the Eurozone, is a problem of governance and common governance, which prevails in the Eurozone crisis, prevails in the Greek crisis, and now prevails in the migrant crisis. What you need to do is, out of this, and Macron in France and other European leaders are trying to forge a new way of governing where you can collective decision-making.